Okay, I guess we are live. Welcome, Dev. It's great to see you again, man.
Hey, good to see you too, Garrett. Good to see you too.
And I think this video right now we're going live to the Radical Undoing YouTube, but I think Dev will be posting his YouTube later, so you guys can check it out
Yeah,
there as well. Um, yeah, so I guess it's been a while since we had a discussion, right? We did one before I put on the workshop in England. Was that the last one? Last fall?
no, I don't remember. I mean, it must be like the best part of the year, maybe a little bit less, something like that.
Yeah. Wow. Time just blazes by, man.
Mine
And
does.
I got in touch with my good friend and amazing client Jonah Robbins. He's been on my YouTube quite a bit, but
Uh,
he mentioned the other day I was talking to him. He's like, "Hey man, when are you going to talk to Dev again?" And I was like, that's when I wrote you the message." So I thought, we
okay,
better get
okay.
in touch. So
You
so
obviously
shout out to
continue
Jonah.
to some higher power.
Yeah, so it's nice to be together here. So as you folks maybe have read in the description, we're going to talk a little bit about typological systems. So I'll first explain why I'm generally against those, and with some caveats. But what I've seen lately is this human design. It's like blowing up, and so I looked into it a little bit, and to me, it looks like another let's call it complicated horoscope. I'll give it that label, meaning the practitioner gets some data about you, your birthday, where you're born, or something like this, and then then they put you into a category, and then in from within that category, you get a bunch of things, or you tend to be like this, you tend to be like that, you're more likely to fall in love with this type of person and not that type. And then it gets people into it's like a complete mindset and way of behaving that I find people respond to it similar to the way they would respond to a psychiatric diagnosis. Now, I'm not completely against diagnostic tools, especially for practitioners. Maybe there are some uses for them. I can think of use cases for this type of stuff, especially for body-based typological systems, where you can see like what Reich would call character structure from the body structure itself and from the habits and the ways that people are utilizing their body. Okay, then you see those patterns, then you can attack those patterns in a multitude of different levels. Okay, so I'm not arguing against those, although I might not always tell a client, okay, you fall into this body type, because I don't want them running off studying that and then having their mindset be around that. I want them to get relief. I want them to flow with their lives. I want them to seek truth, but I don't want them running off conducting another study of the problem. You know what I mean? So with human design, for example, there's a great study that was, I don't know when this was done, and then Darren Brown has duplicated it, and so have some cold readers, where they ask the whole group to give their birth date and time and place, and draw an outline of their hand on a piece of paper, and this will go to the great psychic astrologer, and that person will give a reading to everyone. And what they did was gave everyone in the group the exact same reading, and it was made by a cold reader. And then they asked the people, uh, give a percentage for how much this describes you. And people were saying 80 to 90%, almost always above 50%, when it had a supernatural source of the data. Then the opposite group be given a psychological profile test and then given the results of that, and they would say often it would fall under 50%, but they gave them the exact same thing, but from a psychological scientific source, not a supernatural source. So there's a lot of things we can kind of speculate about with that study. But what I found, let me turn that off, sorry. But what I've found is that people will latch on to some typological system, make a study of it, try to analyze all their friends and their families from within that system, use it as an excuse sometimes. Oh, I'm a Taurus, so that's why I do this. So that's what I mean by these systems will wreak havoc on the seeker, because it'll derail the process of seeking after truth and put it into this whole study of someone else's sometimes arbitrary system. So that's kind of the foundation I wanted to lay for the conversation,
Mhm.
and then make a counterpoint with the like what Lowen was able to do, looking at have people do the bow exercise in mental hospitals, and he could give their diagnosis without ever seeing their paperwork, for example.
I guess thanks for explaining that, because I wasn't quite sure what typographical or whatever it was, what it actually meant. Anyway,
Yeah.
that was really cool. But I guess for me, what I think is like, there are times in our kind of development when it's really useful to have these tools, and just to, when the danger with them is that I think for some people, you get put in this category and then it's like, okay, my life is screwed up. I'm just in this category, and then
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
it depends on where the person's at. But at the same time, it can be useful to have these reflections as something to just kind of see about yourself, or, just to explore that dimension,
Yeah.
Because where I lean towards these days in terms of like mainstream psychology is much more towards like parts work and what used to be called subpersonalities and this kind of thing, where essentially what you're saying is that the human psyche is kind of like a revolver, like a gun. That's a rather crude metaphor, because it's obviously a dangerous thing. But in the sense that there's this kind of barrel in a revolver, a chamber, and it has like 6 different bullets that could be in it, or 6 different subpersonalities that you have. And, the subconscious mind kind of spins it around, and whichever one is looking down the barrel, that's the person that you are in that situation. And what we're really trying to do is not so much to kind of get the perfect person, because a lot of traditional psychology it's all like, oh, I want to be the right kind of person, and somehow then fix that right kind of person inside of me, so I'm always the right kind of person. But in reality, it's more like there are all these sub-personalities, and we just try to use an appropriate one in the situation, and also through that loosening and not getting stuck always looking at the world or a certain situation through one perspective, not getting stuck like that, and having that fluidity starts to create a transcendence, because you start to see that you are not simply this personality. Once it's fluid, once you can move from the person that you're looking out at the world at, then you start naturally to transcend. It just happens, But if you so that's the kind of model I've been working with a lot recently, and writing about, and just starting to get into in my mind. And I think in a sense, so then when I look at like Reichian character structure and 5 personality types, I actually think it's useful to consider yourself in all of them, and just see where it shows up in your life. As long as you don't say, "Oh, I've got all of them," and then you never really dig into any of them. So,
right.
I mean, human design, human design people, because my name Devraj comes from Osho Sannyas, and shit tons of sannyasins were into human design, and I know quite a lot of them. But I never really got into it or anything like that. I think I did it once, and I was some kind of the kind of worker drone ones. I can't remember what the name was, but I wasn't like one of the exciting manifesting type. I was one of the ones that just trolls along in the background or something. But like, there you go. But I also didn't have exact time of birth and stuff, because I was adopted and I don't have much contact with my mother. But like, I think what underlying what I'm trying to say is like, these things can be useful, but for some people they just get stuck in a box like that, and then they're trying to change things around. And I think psychology generally is ready to break out of the box. There's definitely some new trends, like what I've just been talking about with parts work, internal family systems, as you call it in the States, where it's really ready to break into a kind of new dimension,
Interesting.
Systems, I think, are a little bit archaic now.
I mean, the human design thing, that kind of appeals to that. I think that, let's say, especially in a secular society, which didn't really exist prior to a certain time in history, somewhat recent. But in a secular society, there's a lot of people that are, and then also with, I'd say, Catholicism and Protestantism being some of the dominant forms of Christianity, which I find are both incoherent worldview, both teach incoherent worldviews on some level, that leave people wanting, and then that opens the door to the seeking, which I used to do a lot of the occult and all this other kind of stuff, most of which I also found was incoherent, teaching incoherent worldviews, but it was giving me some sense of awe and wonder about existence. It was not leaving it just dry and like scientific materialism alone can do. Uh, but I think human design is speaking to that lack in people, where they want to feel like they're being influenced by a greater power, and that something else is in control. But they're afraid to speak of or seek out God or Christ, for example, because they've been burned by Protestantism and Catholicism, and then the guilt and shame that's built into that those systems. Uh, but I don't think trading one incoherent worldview for another is necessarily the way to go. Um, so with the rise in human design, I find that it'll be likely that people like you and I, and practitioners, some practitioners of the neo-Reichian stuff, the body-based stuff, getting back to the core, getting grounded into reality, into actuality, like digging through the actual details of day-to-day life. I think that there'll be a even more need for the type of work that we do. And so that's kind of why I wanted to frame this as a counterpoint to the human design, because not only because I think it's kind of absurd and ridiculous in what it's claiming, but also because I don't think it will be satisfying in the long run for people. I don't think it will be an ultimately satisfying system, and people will fall away from it, having spent a lot of time and effort trying to navigate it. What I do like about what you said, that's fascinating. That is a way any typology system can be used and can be a lot of fun. Derives from something my teacher, Dr. Hyatt, called the de-victimization technique. And he was using standard personality disorder quizzes. And you would take your disorder quiz. Well, first you use the archetypes of the tarot. So the first 44 weeks were the 22 trump cards of a tarot deck. But you could use any typology system for this. You could use the Enneagram, whatever. And you go through the cards one by one. You study every detail about the card for a week and try and translate what's there into character or behavior traits or behaviors or ways of thinking. Then the second week, you act those out. You actually method act that archetype, let's say. And you go through all of those, and that's the practice. Then for the following 14 weeks, you would do the personality disorders. So you take the quiz, it gives you percentage, ranking of these various personality disorders. You take the one with the highest percentage, study it for a week, and then for the second week, you act out that disorder. Not to your own detriment if you have to do it inside your head, but whenever you can, you act it out at the grocery store, wherever. And then it's de-victimizing because a number of reasons, but you are voluntarizing all of those behaviors and traits. So it's no longer unconscious, no longer unaware, and no longer is it victimizing you. So I found in the acting out deliberately, and I've done other exercises on a similar way, but framed it as a game, where people were able to drop whatever their habitual reaction was and take on a new one voluntarily, and had wild results. I didn't even know, how it worked, but some people came out of like a 6-month depression. I didn't even know they had, I just introduced this stuff and see what happens. So that is one way I could see any typology system being fun and useful, would be lay it all out. Everybody gets a chance to act out, method act each of the personality types, and then they'll be confronted with what ones they have more of a tendency toward.
I mean, the thing with that, of course, is like what's so good with it is like it's got a participatory element.
Yeah.
There's a lot of discussion now online or with various kind of some really interesting stuff going on in all sorts of areas of Western culture and philosophy, where people are really seeing, the problem with just relying on semantic kind of computational knowledge, but it lacks this participatory component, but when you start to really participate and embody something, there's a natural integration. So it's like the danger is if all you're doing is working at a semantic cerebral level, and you get a diagnosis of being a certain kind of neurotic who's just, I don't know, always can't think of anything off the top of my head, but always looking at cars, pictures of cars, you know, and thinking about something or whatever. And then you're just trying to work with this in your mind. It's like you're trying to push it away, or you're doing something, you know, you're trying from this kind of Freudian super ego to do something with it. But there's no need to do something with it. You just need to act it in a safe space, and it will integrate naturally in your personality. And this kind of, in a sense, epitomizes the issue I have with the more cerebral therapies. While they can be useful for a while, they tend to reinforce this kind of very strong egoic control that you're trying to, you know, create this personality that kind of gets, you know, this perfect personality. But in so doing, you just abstract yourself more and more from all your body and your natural sense. So, you know, talking about tarot, you know, it's like key 0 in most of the decks is this thing, the Fool. And often a fool is just this kind of young guy who's just carefree strolling around. He's got a little dog by his feet. And traditionally, the little dog, it's like a little white dog usually, but like it kind of represents like the thinking mind. You know, it's just there to follow along behind you and, you know, just keep a few things, administrative things going. But what's happened in the kind of, you know, since like Martin Luther and Protestantism and the rise of science, the little dog, had a control. So the little dog is now trying to run the whole fucking world, and it's absolutely not created for that. And so we're moving into increasing levels of kind of chaos, particularly in the West, where everything, and now you've got AI, which can function very well with semantic knowledge, computational knowledge, you know? So it's expanding all that stuff and ramping it up as well. And basically there's a massive emphasis on just one type of knowledge. And, you know, and it just goes crazy. And what's also indicative is, like, as I saw, you know, without getting into COVID and stuff, but at that time, people started to deify science. You know what I mean? I absolutely saw it. You know, if you were wearing a lab coat, then you were some kind of like a priest. You know, you knew all about science and you knew all about what was meant to be happening, and you were like this kind of priest character. You know, and it's like people couldn't see it, but you're making science, which is meant to be some, you know, objective methodology for looking at the world. You're turning it into a fucking religion. You know, and it's like, to me, that's demonstrative of the fact that people miss that, you know, the raw materialist viewpoint, which is so limited, doesn't really work. If all you can deal with in life is things that you can measure, you know, I mean, that's a pretty shit life, basically, you know. So the thing is falling apart anyway. It's falling apart. I see it when I go back to the West. I see it, you know. I mean, you can see it's in collapse, you know, and but that's the issue. It seems clear to me that's the issue, you know, and this is the thing when you look at the rise of CBT, which is a great therapy for some people in some situations and can be really, really useful. At the same time, when it goes too far, all you've done is expanded this little dog, and now it's just trying to run everything, and it's completely not suited for doing that. You know, it's just creating havoc.
Well, yeah, and the issue is the core, the scientific materialist worldview is incoherent. It's logically incoherent. It doesn't fully account for the existence of the mind or the existence of information, which information is not, for example, in a tree. There's not the word tree inside there, but we can communicate the treeness, you know what I mean, with a shared language. So shared language and the existence of the mind implies metaphysics. Now they have their answer with evolution is emergent property, that the mind is something the brain does, but that's never been demonstrated or proven.
I mean, it's just. I mean, I followed the you know, the research into consciousness debate for quite a while at various times in the last 20 years, and you know, I'm not a mega brain myself, but I could follow it. And around 2005 to 2010, if you were to poll scientists, I guarantee 99% of those guys said, we're going to work out consciousness comes from the brain and we're going to work out how. Now, you skip forward to 2023 and you poll the same scientists again, you're going to get 5%. People, I
know, yeah.
But people know we've pulled the brain apart left, right, and center, and it's not as simple as that, you know. So now one of the dominant theories in consciousness research is this thing called panpsychism, which stretches back to like the 18th century, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it's just demonstrative of, like, you know, where everything is alive and conscious to a certain degree. But it's in a sense, you know, the fact that all these sort of super brain scientists who are in this field are now stretching back, just desperate for anything which
Yeah.
has the potential theoretical explanatory power. It's just
Well,
it's,
in panpsychism is begging the question, right?
it's fallen, because it's just really good at looking out of the world and changing things, and you want to go to the moon, you want to build a bridge, you want to get something to change the reuptake of your serotonin. Science is your man. It's great. But you try to explore internally, it's pretty much useless. And most of what it's going to give you is of very little value. I mean, I enjoy neuroscience, and I think some of it is really, really useful. But at the same time, you've got to understand the weakness of the tool you're using, and we haven't made that leap quite in the West, but a lot of people have made it, but culturally we haven't made that leap yet. A lot of individuals have made it.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it's like like you mentioned, the appeal to panpsychism is just begging the question. It doesn't. It's saying, well, where does consciousness come from? Oh, well, everything's conscious. You see, it doesn't. There's no actual answer in that. It's like A equals A kind of thing. And then, so yeah, the scientific materialism can't account for metaphysics. That's one issue. And then it can't account for epistemology. How do we know things over time? And then third, it can't account for moral claims or ought claims. You cannot make an ought claim if evolution is true. We're all a machine. There's no free will that could possibly enter that picture, but it's chemical reactions followed by chemical reactions. There is no information. All language is just noise. And then when someone says, "Oh, if they say murder is wrong," like an atheist says murder is wrong, you say, "Okay, why is it wrong?" And they can't explain why it's wrong within their own worldview. They have no way to make an ought claim besides I don't like it, I do like it, or I don't.
I mean, I think you could probably go down the route of evolutionary psychology with that one, because you could say, if you don't have some kind of injunction over killing people, probably the species is going to die out. And that was probably, a kind of, that's why, apes and early creatures kind of bonded together in little groups because there was a survival benefit in doing that. So,
but you see, it doesn't matter if your species survives or not because evolution will just carry on anyway. So there's no way to say that it's good or bad if our species dies, except for you won't like it.
Then you can understand why it, if say, for example, somewhere back down the line, there was like a gene that makes you just really want to kill yourself before you're 10. That gene is not going to survive very long,
right.
because all that's going to happen is people are going to die before they have kids. Bye humanity. So that gene gets wiped out. It doesn't, because the people who've got it all die real quick. They don't have kids, and so it doesn't progress to the next generation. So in the same way, you can make a kind of case up that if you don't have a moral boundary around murder, it could it'll reduce the chance of moving to the next generation and of the tribe being able to stay together. That's just me being devil's advocate there, pointing into.
No, it makes sense, and I could tolerate arguments about microevolution, meaning that some traits pass down and it's observable. But macroevolution, no, because I don't see any examples of species that are halfway between. There's not fish that are just about to walk on the whales that are deciding to come to the land now, and then the reaction is always, well, it took millions of years, and you're like, no, there had to be transition moment there somewhere. You can't just say millions of years of something none of us could actually observe. But on the micro,
you get frogs like newts and shit. When I was at school, they had newts and frogs, and that's kind of like halfway, kind of in between or something. I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, those are still individual species, not becoming another species. So maybe it would happen over time, but anyway, we don't need to derail completely into evolution. But what I mean is, with the scientific materialist worldview, for an example, it does remain difficult to make ought claims, because if you make the ought claim, for example, like you said, that murder is wrong because our species might not make it that far, then on a family level, you could have elitists or something, or people with great wealth saying, well, murder is actually correct for us because our family line is better than yours. Therefore, we're going to kill everybody else. So ours goes forward. You see how it doesn't give us a solid ground for moral.
Basically,
we do have that. That's what I mean. And that the elite do have that worldview.
We do have that a bit, the kind of.
Oh, yeah. That's what I mean. And that's, yeah.
Yeah.
but like laws of the existence of laws of logic can't be explained by laws of logic, for example, or we can't, like the scientific method can't provide a moral claim for why we ought to use the scientific method rather than some other way of assessing information. So it does hang itself on in that regard. Um, one evolution thing I thought was very fun was I saw some guys debating. It was an Orthodox Christian versus an atheist, and the Orthodox person said, "Well, how many kids do you have, and how many kids do your atheist friends have?" And he's like, "Well, we're not going to have kids because of this fucked up world or whatever." And he's like, "Okay, well, I've got 4 kids, and all the Orthodox guys I know have like 4 or 5, 6 kids. So uh, evolutionarily, orthodoxy makes more sense than scientific materialism because it's promoting the species is going to last longer, you know." So that was a nice kind of gotcha
Mm-hmm.
within the
Mm-hmm.
claim, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But it does, in my personal experience so far within Eastern Orthodoxy, you do have a coherent worldview accounts for the fallen nature of humanity. And then you have a history of lives of saints and monks and writings of the church fathers that are like
Mm-hmm.
very deeply psychological and philosophical,
Mm-hmm.
even to the degree in some old monasteries and churches that were around the years 100 and going forward. They would do icons not only of the Christians, but they did some icons of the some of the philosophers, you know, like Socrates and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The idea being that those philosophers perceived the eternal nature of Christ even before he walked the earth. You know, that they were actually leaning toward it. That any seeker after truth would become aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a fascinating point. And because of the rejection of Christianity outright, most people have never encountered the Orthodox tradition from the East, which is so
Mm-hmm.
very different from the way it's perceived and way it's mutated in the West.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. I mean, I mean, I guess I see Christianity that has a very, very deep core to it, but because presumably because it was perceived. I mean, when you talk about Socrates, Platonism, it's this kind of this kind of rehashed Platonism from like I don't know the 5th century or something, Plotinus or something like this, and like that became a central strand of kind of like Christian thought, around Thomas Aquinas and this kind of time. I think
Mm-hmm.
like, it has this very, very deep core to it, but then there's layers, stretching out from there, which reach to the average man in the street. So you're just going through a load of rituals, and you've got your wife and your kids and whatever, and you're bringing them up in a certain way and this kind of thing. And then the kind of external face of Christianity, whether it's Orthodox or Western, Catholic, Protestant, whatever, that external face has certainly, is now perceived as being like, very old and archaic and outdated and
Mm-hmm.
patriarchal, which it is, basically, in certain ways. I mean, that's a discussion, but it kind of is, as I see it, being from a more progressive Osho kind of background, the traditional way that Christianity presents itself to the world as it's facing outwards, is kind of an easy victim for any kind of modernist, because it's
Yeah.
got this very rigid patriarchal structure. But in demolishing Christianity, which is a large amount of and religion in general in wider scheme of things, Islam, in demolishing those things because of the way they appear outwards, the risk is that you miss the inner stuff that's going on underneath it,
Mm-hmm.
because whether you're from the Western esoteric traditions where Rosicrucianism, they're looking at, who Christ is, Christ is the Father, CRC, and blah, 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 in that he is the core presence inside the whole of Rosicrucianism. Or whether you're looking at it from an Orthodox perspective and you're looking, when you get into the depth of it, there's something very, very deep going on with Christianity. And I think that, for whatever reason, never really came out enough, and
Yeah.
that is kind of, and so, when the average person in the street, thinking person, looks at Christianity, they just see a bunch of old myths and a big old patriarchy, and a lot of thou shalt not and this kind of thing. But really,
Yeah.
that's the external face of Christianity. And I'm kind of
Yeah.
reminded of what happened in the 90s in Israel with Kabbalah, where a load of rabbis basically they had the hump because all the young Israelis were going to India to the Osho commune and they were all going to like southern India, to like Sri or Bindo or whoever, to hang out with this dude. And they're like, look, all the young Jews are going to these guys. This is fucked up. We need to release Kabbalah. So they got this guy, Christian Berg, who was a kind of good-looking, mystical kind of dude. Okay, we're going to release Kabbalah to the world because we've got our own mystical system, but we've never released it to the people. Kabbalah's been around for like 1,000, 2,000 years. The Torah, the original 5 books of the Bible, pure Kabbalah, and like, but it's been suppressed and hidden all this time. And then in the mid-90s, the rabbis all got together and said, dude, we need to let this shit out. Find some good-looking young rabbis and get them to put it out, because otherwise all the young Jewish people, our next generation, are all going to go to India and become bloody Buddhists, or whatever, So it's like, so that happened. And probably the Western Church needed to do this shit. It needs to also start. And there are people like Jonathan Pajot or whatever.
Right. Yeah, there's some interesting ones too. Yeah, like even Seraphim Rose was a great. Seraphim Rose, he was the one who was devoted to Alan Watts for many years.
Yeah.
And was part of the '60s counterculture revolution and all this, and later found and was studying.
They just need to bring it out, because it's like it's still suppressed. If you ask me, they haven't brought Christ out, what it really means, and the depth of it out into the world. And I think that's part of what's causing. I mean, maybe that's just part of how it's meant to be. I've heard heavy Christians say that maybe we just have to go through this time of vast turmoil and persecution, But I mean, whatever. That's one strategy that, for example, the Jews use, as I mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, it is fascinating. That's an interesting point. There is somewhat of a resurgence of, let's say, generally traditional Christianity. First, let's say traditionalism, period. Secondarily, traditional Christianity. And then third, I'm guessing numbers-wise, but third, also Orthodoxy itself has seen a resurgence. Not only in the West, it is happening in the West, but also among the people I've met, and this is more anecdotal, but among the people I've met in like younger people from Serbia, for example. That's who I have the most contact with, because Croatia is Catholic, and it, because of the wars in the last 50 years or 70 years, it breaks down on national boundaries, although it's not supposed to, technically, from the inside of the religions, particularly Orthodoxy. That's nationality is not supposed to be an issue, but of course, we're on the edge of the Byzantine Empire, basically, here. You know what I mean? So that is still part of it. But the younger people I've met, Serbian and also Croatian, have started to rediscover Christianity. Whereas Yugoslavia was communist, and the church was allowed to exist for the most part. The churches were allowed to exist, but were kind of suppressed. Like, don't bring this out in the public. You guys can go to church if you want, but you're not going to be a member of the party, or whatever.
Okay,
if you're high up in yeah. So now with the change, the fall of Yugoslavia, and then the Serbians have more embraced the Serbian Orthodox Church, which has long and rich tradition. There's 1 million monasteries and churches everywhere, and Bulgaria as well. And as you go east, so yeah, there is some return to that in almost sort of an innocent way that I find very beautiful. There's people that are just rediscovering that, even though they grew up in it. But they're discovering what it actually means to be a part of that. What is your behavior supposed to be like? What is your life supposed to be like? How do you interact with other people? And it's providing a counterpoint to what I think is a very big mess of modernity, where people are saying, okay, you can date whoever you want, you can go fuck whoever you want, you can, you know what I mean? You can do all these things. You're totally free. Women can be totally free, never get a husband, don't have any kids, sell their eggs, or not sell their eggs, but there's workplaces who will have executive women. They'll pay them to freeze their eggs for them so they could have a baby after their 40s.
Yeah.
This kind of stuff, man. And the mindset of a woman in her 20s is going to be very different than the mindset of that woman in her 40s who didn't have those kids, in order to serve a career. And whether or not there's a more or less freedom, or if that's better or worse, the issue I see in it is is that if we're not reliant on each other as strong men in a community, and then the families relying on each other, and then those communities relying on each other, that dependency turns to the state and the police. So it's when we're not dependent on each other and strong men dependent on each other, protecting our families, then we become default dependent on the state, who has demonstrated throughout history generally doesn't give a shit about us. They'll just let us be slaughtered for their own ends, you know. And so I've seen that happen in the West under the guise of freedom, the sexual revolution, all this kind of stuff, which had some benefits. Okay, it definitely had some benefits to the individual for sure, but it has massive detriments to society and to culture and to individuals. So I think there's a backlash happening now.
Well, yeah. I mean, there is a backlash, but I mean, I'm different in the sense that, like, you're pretty orthodox these days, I guess, and like,
Yeah.
I'm basically also Sonia, so it's going to be hard for me to stand up for patriarchal structures. What I think is problematic at its core is that Western modernism, if you want to call it something, this kind of super secular, scientific, materialist way, it's removed some of the traditional apparatus of society. It's eroded the family, which, no way is the family perfect. I live in plenty of,
Of course.
family system cultures. 24/7, I'm seeing the imperfections of the traditional family in Turkey, no problem. Every day when I walk out of my apartment. So the idea that these structures from the past were perfect is I would say pretty fantastical. So, but what's happened in the West is we've eroded the family structure, we've eroded the religious structure, and we've become reliant on kind of forward progress and the constant kind of manufacture of dopamine in the brain through our behavior. And now what's happened is COVID, which has put it like a giant, stick through the spokes of the bicycle wheel, and it's stopped the Western economies moving forwards. And things are looking pretty fucked up. I mean, it's like, I'm not living in the West anymore, but when I read and talk to Western people and British people, because I'm British originally, it's clear that the culture is really struggling, because what's happened is there's no safety net anymore. The family, for all its problems and issues and dramas and patriarchal structures or whatever, still provided quite a strong holding for people if they were struggling. Likewise, religion, the church, provided quite a strong holding for people if they were struggling. And without those things in the fabric of society, people are just lost trying to get nourishment on Zoom, which they're just not getting, and they need contact, they need to be heard, they need basic things, which often they themselves are not even sufficiently self-aware to know what they need, but they're just struggling and just getting into addictive behaviors, they're running out of money, and they're just buying, or they're using drugs or whatever, it's collapsing, and they're just, and so we've taken these kind of slightly negative or things that could be interpreted as negative stuff out or weakened them, but there's nothing in their place. And that's what I see as the core problem. Now, from there, some people just say, well, you need to bring back Christianity, you need to bring back the family, that's okay. But to me, that's a little bit fast jumping between, I like to sort of say, okay, here's an issue. And not to have to immediately jump to, okay, and the solution is this, because that's also where people get manipulated, that tradition, this problem, reaction, solution, and so to say, okay, there is an issue in the West where there's just not enough holding for people anymore. People don't have jobs, people are struggling, what is there to hold them? We need to put something, and then that's like a discussion, that is, which ideally happens at a governmental level, but probably won't, but that's the thing. And secondarily to what you're saying, I think the aspect of dismantling patriarchal structures that isn't looked at is that patriarchal structures are quite strong. That's the thing, they're quite strong, and they represent a counterweight, like I interpret you as saying, to governmental power, but you can't necessarily push. I was living in Georgia, a very patriarchal country, next door to Turkey, not the state of America. And you cannot really push the people around that much, because they've got a very strong way of being. They don't have much money. Average wage is like $200 a month in the country. That's nothing. But they've got this strength from that. because they've got this Christian tradition stretching back, nearly 2,000 years, or since 3rd century AD,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it really holds people in a certain way. And you might have issues with it and go through your rebellious phase, but it holds people. So when you see that structure being dismantled now, is that a natural, organic change, or is it more that government or geopolitical forces are trying to stop people being strong? And that's the question that isn't really addressed. Do you get what I'm saying? It's
Yeah,
difficult.
I do. Yeah.
You see a patriarchal structure being dismantled. Is that something that's just healthy and natural? Because aspects of it probably are. But then, or is it just a way to stop people being powerful so that government can become stronger and so it can dominate
Right.
even more?
Because, yeah, the dependency, it has to go somewhere. So if the issue is like if you have a single woman who decides to stay single for her whole life, then if she has issues, or if she starts to fall apart, or if she didn't put her retirement together properly, or if it gets swindled away, where does she turn? Who does she turn to? And historically, for all the existence of humanity, there was the man, but there was also the communities of families. So there were families and then larger family groups, and it was different depending on if it was tribal or whatever, but almost always the same. The safety net was the surrounding people. Now, and I was like a loner a lot of my life and a rebel and all this kind of stuff, and got by on my own and did all this hitchhiking and stuff. But at a certain point, now I'm seeing like, okay, I now I'm working to be a part of the community I live in, and trying to reach out, do what I can. And I found like it's so refreshing, so nourishing to actually be available for people on that level, Then when I wasn't, and I also see like when I get old and stuff like that, I do want to have people around who care about me and who I care about, this kind of stuff at some point, not just the state, or some hospital somewhere or something like this.
Yeah.
So um, so that's the issue with dismantling patriarchal structures, is that if we want to have make ought claims or enforce a moral code of some sort, because in any society there's enforcement of the moral code, whether it's on a tribal level where they use public shaming, which is like in Vanuatu, I believe, which works for them in that context, or you're going to have a system of executions or exile or whatever. What you end up having is you still have to rely on the men to do the enforcement generally, and some bigger, stronger women. But so even if we deconstruct one patriarchal system, if we want to enforce the values of the new system, who's going to do the enforcement and how? That's the issue that I find that doesn't get addressed very often. Like defund the police, and now those cities who did that have murder rates skyrocketing. It's insane. I have friends in Minneapolis.
Did they actually do that? Did they actually defund the police in America in some places?
In some places they did, yeah. And in the police, meaning they pulled funding, for police departments. Not all the funding, of course, because it would be a little chaos. But yeah, in Minneapolis, I have friends living there, and they said there's gunshots constantly now where there used to not be. None of the places that got burned down got rebuilt. Businesses don't want to operate in those neighborhoods. Cops won't come when you call them to those neighborhoods anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it is getting bad, and certainly, when I remember seeing like there was this whole, that the black guy in America who got killed during COVID, by the cops and stuff. It's bad. But they may have had a march about it or something to do with that in the UK, in Brighton, where I was at the time. And there was this people carrying these defund the police banners. And I looked at them and I thought, you wouldn't survive 2 minutes in prison, man.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
I not really take the piss out of them. They're like 20-year-old intellectuals and they want to challenge the system and whatever. But like, I just thought, you guys aren't going to survive a minute in an anarchic structure. You aren't going to have a fucking chance. The last thing you want to do is defund the police unless you're like 6'6" and you're fucking hard, because then you've got a load of mates, maybe there's something in it for you. Otherwise, you just need to not defund the police, basically.
Yeah.
There was this, it's like this very kind of cerebral people who just live in these kind of ideas about fairness and stuff. But underneath that, you've got a very brutal kind of structure in society still, particularly in the UK. There's still a lot of violence, a lot of gangs and stuff like that, same as the States.
Mm-hmm.
The States are extreme. But Yeah, I mean, that's just, yeah. I mean, I see young people get manipulated a bit. I think what's going on a lot now is that phase of healthy protesting that we have that tends to, provide a healthy upheaval of culture, where you
Yeah.
go on marches. I did all this stuff for years, when I was in my 20s. But what's happened is that gets manipulated, it gets manipulated by the state or by state
Oh
actors.
yeah.
So the
Yeah.
young people just having their minds weaponized to kind of fulfill the desires for certain state actors to increase geopolitical control in certain areas of the world. I mean, I see that going on. But I think it's
Yeah.
also just, I mean, maybe we're drifting off topic a bit away from
No,
psychology.
I think it's all related, man. It definitely
Yeah,
relates.
yeah. I mean, the underlying thing is strength will only come when you work on yourself, and particularly at a kind of gut level. You will not get strength from somewhere else. Not real fibrous, powerful strength that can hold something up. And it doesn't really matter if you're male or female. In fact, I would say, on my experience of the heavy end of the therapy scene, women in their core are stronger than men, probably because they're the ones that have the babies. Physically, no, they're not going to press 200 kilos or whatever, but like in their kind of core strength and their ability to hold something together, women have got that survival instinct in the belly, very, very strong, but it's covered
Yeah.
over by the structures of society. In my work, that's been more what I bring out. And when I was running a lot of groups, I would see it in women. They come in and they've got this low self-esteem, and they work for a bit with this stuff, and then they start to realize, if I keep going with this shit, I'm really going to become strong. And with men, it's more likely that it's like they're not going to put in the fucking work. And it's not a massive separation, but it's like 60-40. The women have the potential to go stronger. That's been my perception when I was doing when I was running a lot of stuff. When they get into it, the core is very strong. And like I said, at Osho Sannyas, I mean, it was complete matriarchy, total fucking matriarchy. And I wasn't even around in those days. I just stayed in the Osho communes later. But they were all super matriarchal. And yeah, it's got its own issues, but you're not going to fuck with the Mars, the women, they're also holding the structure and the power, It does not have to be patriarchal. That's been my experience personally.
Mm-hmm.
You need something that's going to hold people up, Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. What was I thinking of there? Tying it back to the work that you and I do is I'm even I do talk about orthodoxy and stuff like that when it's relevant. But what I found is that if that is something that's contains the truth, which I believe it does, that I'm more deal in helping people dispense with the false that they are constantly carrying around.
Yeah.
So one way I conceive of the work, just one, not the exclusively, but
Yeah.
one way I conceive of the work is to destroy the chronic tensions, which are not normal, although they become normalized, but they aren't normal for the human body. The way it's created is not meant to sustain that chronic tension over time. So it causes early decay and living rigor, as one chiropractor labeled it, like that the unused or chronically tense muscles would go into rigor mortis ahead of time. So living rigor. And then you could bring life back to it, He was doing myofascial release and deep kind of tissue stuff, but also the undoing work, the bioenergetics, also has a way of spreading the life force back into those dead areas. Or like Reich said, de-armoring, same thing, different words.
Yeah.
But I found that with clients who had lost their religion, so to speak, or lost some sense of faith, I never was even promoting that at all in any of the work I do, and I probably still won't. I may encourage some form of prayer or present awareness or something, but I found that they rediscovered their own faith automatically when they got rid of the chronic tensions and then the correlated bullshit in the mind.
Yeah.
I see that the mind has to be filled with shit to maintain the chronic tension. The chronic tension has to be there to maintain the shit of the mind.
Yeah.
And when you attack one, the other one is also removed.
Yeah.
And then they would naturally, what someone called it, their bullshit detector would become activated, and they'd go, okay, half these books I have are just fucking, I can't even make sense of them anymore. And then the other stuff that is relevant or that is coherent and truthful for them, starts to shine. It starts to present itself. Their faith is restored, but from a bodily level, a
Yeah.
visceral, you know.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. I very much agree with that, Garrett. I mean, that's always that was actually, I even remember pretty much, being a few years into the therapeutic process and starting to get it, when I was in this center in Holland, like there's nothing I can actually do to become myself or the real me. But I can take out, what I can do is take out the blocks. What I can do is take out the blocks. I can identify the blocks and go in and move them and start to dissolve them or whatever. And if I take out a block, then just whatever remains must be a deeper version of me. And I think a lot of people come to that realization as well, that you're fundamentally, if you're still trying to make yourself a certain kind of person, you're still locked up in that superego game, and it's not really going to work. At some point it starts to become kind of evident. But what you can do, if it's authentic, is to work on the blocks. And it's also relaxing in a way, because you don't, in the sense that you don't have to worry about, all this moral pressure to be the right kind of person. It's more like you take out the blocks and you feel more naturally you, and it actually is more okay. Most of the time. Sometimes if you've been very passive and just a pleaser, you have to start to stand up for yourself. And you'll find that energy, and that can be challenging because people are used to you as a doormat, but but for many people, but nevertheless, it's like that fundamental idea, okay, we can't find the real me by going out like that, but we can take out the blocks, and what remains will be nearer to the real me. I think it's a great concept.
Yeah, it's totally amazing, and it has, it relies on. I do have faith in the fact that we are created to find the truth, and so, like I said, we just remove the false, which includes those physical blocks. And when we can get to work on the physical level, there's no avoiding the working. You know what I mean? The people can try to avoid it, but when we're in person or we're somewhere where I can monitor people, they can't not do the work.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, Garrett, because when you work on the body, it's real. You might not like what happens, but it's real, because when you're working, really pulsing into the belly, when you're working really on the muscles and around the, behind the energetic heart or whatever, whatever's going, if you're working in the body, it's real, basically.
Yeah.
If you work with the mind, there's always going to be this tendency to think, well, is that really real or not? Can I really have to hold myself like this now or whatever? But when you work with the body, you might not like it, but you have to kind of face it in a sense, because it is real.
Yeah, it's plain and simple. That's a massive point right there. I hope that people kind of grasp that, who are listening. Like, that's so huge. Bruce Lee would talk like that too. He said, if you, and I see this. I don't like the term anymore, but the Neo-Reichian work, whatever this body of work is, generally, I see it as kind of like the Jeet Kune Do of self-work, like, meaning it can, whoever the practitioners are, myself or yourself, are meant to go out, put it out into the world, put it to the test, and find other things we can add to it, find ways to enhance it, find ways to make it more digestible, whatever the case may be. And each practitioner brings their own flavor to it in a natural way, in a flowing way. But yeah, Bruce Lee would mention about martial arts. First, you have to work on the physical level, because you can get lost on the intellectual, emotional, and spiritual levels. You have to have ground first. Because a person could have the belief, they could study some whole martial arts system that says, this is how you block punches, and this is how you strike somebody or whatever. And they'll never know if that's true or not. But the second they're in the ring, they're like, okay, no, it's like this, actually. Instantly what's workable and what's not. So the same applies to this type of work. You get down to work, just moving the eyes around, or stretching out the jaw, or, like you said, or pushing on here, and a person will know what presence is right away. But a person could read 1 million books about power of now, about being present, about reading all the Rumi poetry on the planet, reading 1 million books, reading the Bible, reading the lives of saints. And it can exist only in this world of words on the intellectual level. They have no way to test it, no way to even know what the hell's actually going on.
It's kind of like what we used to call it, like walking around a swimming pool, reading a book about how water feels,
It's exactly. Yeah.
And that's a little bit disparaging because it can be really useful to read books straight away, you know, to get some level of understanding before you jump in,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
because that can be useful and to sustain you, because if you're in deep body-based process, sometimes you're so thrown, you're like, why the fuck am I doing this shit? But if you have like a mental construct and you can understand
Yeah.
why you're doing this stuff, and but it's going to be good in the end, you know, it stops you from jumping out.
Well, yeah, and I actually use TV. I use
I've actually,
TV
sorry,
as a
just
technique.
before you get going, I've actually got to jump off in a minute because I've got to,
Okay,
like, but this is a cool
cool. I'll be
conversation,
aware of that.
and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and we should do more of these too, man, because we really get
Yeah,
going on this stuff. It's so fun, and I appreciate the different perspective too, and that we can be an example for people to at least be able to communicate, regardless of where the differences in our philosophy lie. And that's also testament to what we're saying about this physical work. We have this ground that you and I both have experienced and understand and work with that allows us a common foundation. And on that foundation, we can explore anything.
yeah.
If we have disagreements about it, it doesn't really matter. And this,
Well, the thing is, the stuff that gets disagreed about invariably is the mind stuff. And
yeah,
if you work deep enough in the body, you don't really need the mind stuff. The mind is just a little dog. It's just a little
yeah,
dog in the pool
yeah.
card.
I love it. So I use TV. I use TV as a pressure release valve. I use it as because there's sometimes where clients are going through the hell of the body work, and they're not going to do another exercise I give them to relieve that. I know from experience, if I say, okay, do this every morning, if the person starts to get depressed or something, they're for sure not going to fucking do it. They just won't do it, and I know it. But if I say, okay, I want you to binge watch this TV series, and I teach them how to watch it in an active way, not a passive way. So there's a trick in there. But I'll put them on The Mentalist, for example, and I'll say, just compare your mindset to and the rest of the character's mindset to Patrick Jane's mindset, the main character. What is different about that? And just
Yeah.
observe that. It's police procedural. It's meant to carry your attention span, and it's good writing. It's fun. It's playful, and it's deep.
Mhm.
Or I'll have him watch Burn Notice, which is about a spy, and he's telling you what's going on in his mind versus all the regular people who aren't spies. Say, okay, so watch. What can you learn from this mindset? Watch it like a little kid. Pretend you're the main character. What would you do different in your own life if you were this guy? You
Cool,
know?
man. I've got to jump
Okay, I'll
off.
let you jump off here. So yeah, that was a good place to leave it. I'm going to cover a lot more about that.
I really appreciate speaking to you, Garrett. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, you too, man. It really expands my mind about things that yeah, it's beautiful. So I really appreciate you. Thanks for coming on, Dev. We'll be in touch again soon, and we can do more
Yes.
of these. I think it would be great. So
Cool. I'm up for it, man. I'm up for it. Cool. Great. Thank you, Garrett.
thanks, man. Talk to you soon. Enjoy.
Cheers.
All right. Let me bring him off there. There we go. So yeah, just to conclude here, Snake Oil Salesman, I wanted to acknowledge your comment. Jung said typologies are an act of hubris, attempting to draw concrete lines and delineations in the ocean of the unconscious, which is dynamic. So thanks for the comment. It's interesting because a lot of the people who are addicted to the typologies tend to be the Jungians, but maybe they missed that quote. So yeah, I was hoping to see more questions and things, but it's always fun to speak with Dev. So to conclude, I wanted to make another point about the TV training, and I'm probably going to put something together. I have a catalog of shows and something about passive versus active watching, which I think would make a wonderful workshop. But the TV training also includes fake Tai Chi, so I'll try to link to the fake Tai Chi intro workshop. And rather than it being about typologies, which like Dev and I were just talking about, where you go through the different types and act out those traits, what you do is take your favorite characters from books, comic books, games, movies, and shows, especially from when you were a little kid, and especially characters that you've loved over a long arc of time in your life, and to study the traits of those characters and to act out your favorite scenes, both on an internal level, on a dialogue level with the lines that those characters speak, but then also, most importantly, on the physical level. You method act your favorite scenes from those films, and you will find that you can recover the traits that you lost, that you projected onto those entertainment figures. So it's sort of the opposite of typology, but drawing from your own admiration of TV and other fictional and non-fictional characters, and then taking on those traits. But you do so in a fun way with fake Tai Chi, so your mind won't subvert you thinking you're going to therapy or something like this. So I just want to make a short note about that, and I'll post a link hopefully when I make this video into a YouTube video instead of live. I'll make sure I link to the fake Tai Chi intro workshop. But just wanted to plant the seed and let you folks know we'll probably do some kind of a deeper ongoing training around how to use Netflix, to transcend your suffering and aim yourself back at God. So see what happens with that. Anyway, thanks for watching. And as you can see, I'm kind of picking up steam with the live stream. So we're going to do a lot more of these. Maybe we'll do some debunking of some of the typology stuff and watch some YouTube videos. Who knows? And if you ever want to jump on the channel with me and have a discussion or experience some of the radical undoing work, send me a message and we will do that. Otherwise, much love, have fun, and enjoy. See you soon.